Good morning. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, now that the Major League Baseball season came to an end on Tuesday night, I'm sure you've had a chance to read the book of Acts. And in reading, you know it starts with Jesus telling the disciples to wait. Wait so that they will be equipped to go and tell the good news, be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. And so in the first chapter of Acts, it's exactly what they do. They just sit and wait. And in the second chapter of Acts, the Holy Spirit shows up and gives them a power beyond anything they ever could have imagined. It's so powerful, in fact, that the most unlikely of the 12 disciples, Peter, gets up, preaches a sermon, and 3,000 people come to faith. So it's working, isn't it? This thing that Jesus said is going to happen is beginning to happen. Well, almost. Because this is Jerusalem. What happens to Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth? The Apostle Paul comes along, and in the 13th chapter of Acts, Paul takes the gospel beyond Judea, beyond Samaria, and he goes into Asia Minor. And the church grows for the very first time beyond the city of Jerusalem. And then in the 16th chapter of Acts, Paul jumps from Asia, the continent, into Europe. And he goes through present-day Turkey, and he starts churches. And the church grows ever more. And now we're in the 17th chapter of Acts, and Paul goes all the way down the Macedonian Peninsula into the heart of the center of intellectual and philosophical thinking, into the city of Athens. You know, this is like Paul. He's like Dorothy going into the Emerald City of Oz. This is everything you could ever hope for. This is where Paul is going to shine the most, because these are people who love ideas. And Paul, as you know, loves to engage people with ideas. So he makes his way to the center of intellectual learning, a place called Mars Hill. And on Mars Hill, he makes this bold statement that God has revealed himself in the person of Jesus Christ, who died and is now risen from the dead. And this God, this Jesus, makes all of the other gods that the Greeks believed in, well, to show them just simply as falsities, as phonies, as incompetence against this person of Jesus. And so Paul goes beyond Judea, beyond Samaria, beyond even the ends of the earth, as he proclaims the good news of Jesus Christ, and the church keeps on growing. So in reference to what Jesus said needed to happen, the disciples were supposed to do this. It's like Paul is saying, okay, you guys, you disciples, take care of Jerusalem. I've got the ends of the earth kind of thing covered. And he does. I mean, he does it. If it wasn't for the Apostle Paul, we wouldn't have most of the New Testament. If it wasn't for the Apostle Paul, there's no telling how we would interpret what Jesus did for us on the cross. If it wasn't for the Apostle Paul, I dare say we would not be here today. The request by Jesus to be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth did not retire when Paul retired. That's a message that we are called to carry into the streets even today. You, me, witnesses of Jesus Christ. And so I wonder, what do the streets look like that we're asked to take the message of Jesus to? My suspicion is it looks very much like the streets of our cities. If you were thinking about moving into our area, and you were going to try to figure out the values of our area based on the street signs that you see, what would you find? Well, in Visalia, you might think that this is a very educated town, that people go to some of the most prestigious universities and colleges in the nation. And as I wandered around town taking a look at the names of the streets, I noticed there was no California Lutheran University, which is a problem. You might also notice that there were many streets named after trees. We have every imaginable tree identified in Visalia, never mind that most of these trees would not grow in the valley heat. We love trees in our cities. Or you might think maybe this city was founded by women, or the people of this city have a very special place in their heart for women. Now, there are some men-named streets, but by far the most popular named streets are named after women, which makes you wonder, what did those women do to get a street named after them? And would they feel like that was a compliment if they had a street named after them? If you travel to the south, to the city of Tulare, you might think that the city there is very proud of our nation's history, especially in regard to past leaders, to presidents, because you will find many streets named after dead presidents. So far, there are only men, but who knows the future? Or you might think, maybe Tulare loves having a little wine with dinner, or maybe they imbibe a little bit too much wine during the week. Whatever the case, many streets in Tulare named after the wine industry. Or you might say, coming into these towns, anything that Paul might have said. Perhaps you would say this: Visalians, Tularians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way, for as I went through the city and looked carefully at the streets that you have named, I have found among them many which suggest that there are a multitude of gods that you worship. And at this point, you would suggest what those gods look like based on the street signs that you would see. You might point out the god of pride. Having a healthy outlook for yourself, having confidence, having good feelings about yourself are important things. But it doesn't take much to push the self-esteem envelope to the point where it creates pride. Great author T.S. Eliot once wrote, "Most of the trouble of this world is caused by people wanting to be important." Indeed, pride is at the heart of selfishness. Pride is worshiping oneself, believing oneself to be the center of the universe. And it is perhaps the most original of all sins. I shiver when I hear about black pride, gay pride, Lutheran pride, because it is God who opposes the pride, we're told in the book of James, but gives grace to the humble. Or you might point out prosperity, the God of prosperity. You might drive around and say to yourself, now these are people who very much want to appear wealthy, rich, and secure. You will notice the many homes with beautiful houses and lawns, manicured landscapes, RVs, boats parked in the driveways, cars parked on the lawn. There is often a very fine line that separates owning nice things and having, well, nice things own us. The lure of materialism, big bank accounts, secure massive IRAs, vacation homes, pleasurable living, it all has the power of a consumable God. The more you consume, the more you want. The Apostle Paul himself warned, in their eagerness to be rich, many have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. Or you might point out the God of heritage. You might see people wanting to live in the past. If only we could get back to the people we once were, if only we could get back to our original values, if only we could get back to that time when things were simpler and better. You might bristle at such talk, especially if you're an African American for whom the past was not so good. Or if you were a woman for whom the past meant that you could not hold certain jobs or even vote. Many worship the God of the past, our heritage. But it is God who calls us to look to the future. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old, the prophet Isaiah said. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you perceive it? Or you might worship the God of love. Now to be sure, love is a good thing. It can even be a great thing. I mean, what would life be like without love? But maybe you've noticed as you drive around, people seem to be obsessed with love. You will notice many stores selling flowers, others selling chocolates, and others selling Hallmark cards. And you get Wi-Fi so that you know there are many looking for love on the dating sites. Love is a powerful emotion that sometimes can be very, very deceptive. It can intoxicate and cause people just to love the idea of being in love. And with the rate of divorce and broken relationships, you know that love in itself cannot be sustained. Some people make love out to be a god, but the Apostle John reminds us that love is not God. God is love. As you drive further, you notice a lot of churches. A lot of churches. Now that could be a good thing, right? But on the other hand, you notice that all of these churches, by perhaps identifying the Christian connection, also have names that attach them to other identities. Lutheran, Roman Catholic, Methodist, Episcopalian, Anglican. And some of them have names that, well, just simply appear to be rather odd. They don't sound like churches at all. The Road, the Edge of the road. And you begin to think, maybe in the effort to connect with God, some of these people have made gods out of their denominations, or their theologies, or their religious traditions, or, God forbid, even their music ministers. And you remember what Jesus said, true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him. Oh, there are other gods you may notice as you drive around town. But the question is before us, how will you, like Paul, take your faith to the streets? How do you go public? You don't have an option on this, you know. You've got to go public with your faith. But I know it's not an easy thing to do. So how do you do it? In Visalia and Tulare, and the many surrounding cities, there are approximately 250,000 people who live around in this area. And of that 250,000 people, maybe about 100,000 are somehow connected loosely to a church. And of that 100,000, there are roughly 50,000 that are actually active in a church. That means that there are over 150,000 people who, now depending on how you look at things, who are either possibly going to experience eternity without God, or who are not going to experience the fullness of life that God has in store for them while they draw breath here. 150,000. And chances are some of them are living on your street. So how do you engage? Well, maybe you engage like Paul. Maybe you engage in the boldness of a guy like Paul. Did you notice wherever Paul goes, he wants to talk faith with people. He wants to go deep with them. Maybe you are like Paul, and when you go to Winco, you look forward to those opportunities to engage everybody you can imagine with the gospel of Jesus Christ. If that's you, good for you. It's not so much my style, nor a lot of people. So how might you do it different? How do you engage people in a way that isn't quite so bold? Maybe the simplest way you can do so is to silently pray for the people in your neighborhood. Perhaps all you need to do is to walk the streets of your neighborhood late afternoon or evening and stop in front of every home on your street and pray silently for the people behind those closed doors, whether or not you know them, whether or not you know the issues they face. Or maybe there does come a time when taking the message of Christ to the streets requires a little bit more boldness. Maybe it is being able to say to someone that you're in conversation with, someone who is telling you about their problems, hey, do you mind if I pray for you? And if you want to push the boldness envelope a little bit farther and say, like, right now? Or maybe you look for this opportunity to simply say, would you like to go with me to church on Sunday? To the church that I go to? Now, I know that's risky because, well, what if they say no? Worse yet, what if they say yes? What if they come with you to church and they don't like it? I know taking your faith to the streets is not an easy thing, but let me take the edge away for a moment and remind you, in fact, it's not so edgy. Because how people respond, what they do, what they think of you, it's not really up to you. It's up to God. This is God's church. This is God's ministry. This is the faith that God has given us. If you were looking around our fine cities, and maybe you would stumble upon one more street, Cross Street. This is the street, really, that we live on as people of faith. Because Because under the cross, we know well enough about our sin and our guilt and our shame and regret. But under the cross, we also know about forgiveness, about pardon, and about grace. Under the cross, we know well enough about our fears and our limitations and our inadequacies. But under the cross, we also know about the hope that God has given us, about the possibilities that God has instilled within us, and about the redemption that God has made for us. Under the cross, we know about our diseases, our decay, and even our pending death. But under the cross, we also know about the resurrection of Jesus Christ and about life everlasting. The cross is where we meet God in the form of Jesus. And this is a God who is stronger than, greater than, more almighty than all the imposter gods that you will find in the marketplace. And we want others to know about this God we believe in. It is a pivotal thing, this cross, because ultimately, this is what we take with us when we go into the streets and to the ends of the earth. Amen. The peace of the Lord be with you always. Thank you. I invite you to rise and share the peace of Christ with those who are near you.